Steve Moe from Parry Field Lawyers. Welcome to the show.
Tēnā koe, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so good to be talking about this one because it was something I'm going to be honest about. I didn't realise was happening behind the scenes, and I suspect I'm not the only one out there. So let's just get into this. The government says the tax reform is about fairness. Now, do you think the current system is unfair if this is where they're going?
Yeah, so it's actually almost a philosophical point. So
Mm,
it's important to break it down. Just to clarify one thing, it isn't proposed that there's tax on the donations that churches receive. What they're consulting about is whether there would be tax on unrelated business income. So just to ease the fear, it's
yes.
actually focusing in on business income. But my worry is that there are unintended consequences from that focus. I think that the regime, the tax regime and the charities regime is actually working pretty well. It's hard to become a charity. You have to show that you're advancing charitable purposes. You have to be accountable. You have to submit your accounts. And so there are safeguards already in place. And what I fear is that this review is really looking at where can we look for revenue to
Mm,
supplement losses of revenue in other places. And it comes from a position of saying, are charities having some type of a loophole where they're not paying tax, but they should pay tax?
okay.
And so my fear is almost a philosophical one, because actually there are reasons that we give tax concessions to charities because they are able to do good in the community in a way that the government probably can't. And I'm sure the listeners are aware in their own circumstances, their own churches, of the many, many ways that the community is reached and supported, whether it's elderly people, youth, addictions. There's many things that are done.
Mm. Now, I've seen that you've actually described changing the tax rules for charity as being like an opening a Pandora's box. Now, why are you not convinced it's the right approach?
So, from my perspective, I think that the Pandora's box is really referring to let me put a different metaphor.
Okay.
You put a frog in boiling water and it will jump out. You put it in cold water and you heat it up and it will just keep staying there. So, what I'm worried about by the Pandora's box reference is that by opening the door to taxing a certain part of charities, income, you're actually eroding the position of charities as a whole. So not all charities, not all churches will be impacted directly by what may happen. And it's a consultation which is happening now. People have till the end of the month to provide their feedback. But by opening the door and saying, well, we might tax unrelated business income, what's to stop it at the next review saying, well, we might tax related business income or passive income? And that probably would have an impact on many charities.
I mean, I wonder if we could zero in on the impact that these changes could have on churches and faith-based organisations in particular. Could we look at that?
Yeah, for sure. I think one piece of good news, it's not all negative. I'm always a glass half full.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
one of the
sure.
good things is that the IRD is consulting about could we increase the use of donation tax receipts. So that would be a positive thing for churches. One of the proposed changes is that you would actually be able to claim your donation back, the 1/3 back as you give it, rather than waiting until the end of the financial
Mm,
year.
mm.
So that would encourage people to give more rather than losing that donation receipt and forgetting what you gave to. You might be able to receive it more quickly. So that's a positive thing. It's not all negative. And charities can submit on this and say, I agree with this, which is what I encourage all charities to do, all churches. But the real issue is some churches do have business income, and some Christian charities or charities do have business income. So the scenario here is we are operating a charity and we own a business which is not advancing the purposes of our charity, but we get financial benefit. The profits that come to us allow us to better serve our community. So it's potentially those churches or charities that might be captured by proposed changes.
Okay, so do you think the public then understands why a charity like, or thinking sanitarium,
Yeah.
that operates tax free? Do you think we kind of understand that? Should there be more transparency when it comes to something like that?
It's a great question, and it's the actual example that's used in every conversation.
Really?
Everyone throws
Okay.
this out. So just to break it down briefly, though, that is a great example for us to consider from a Christian perspective because
Hmm.
sanitarium is owned by a church. And so there are safeguards in place already in the sense of the profits go to the church to advance its purposes. Some
Ah.
of those are religious purposes, but my children just went in the Weet-Bix triathlon, try as in TRY, and there have been 500,000 Kiwi kids who've done that. So that comes from sanitarium. So there's I think there's a misconception that somehow they are eroding prices of
Hmm.
others or they're competing with other breakfast food cereals. But actually, the profits have to go to advance the purpose.
Right.
And ultimately, all charities are accountable because they have to report to the charities regulator, Charity Services. So if they're a certain size, they even have to get audited accounts. So there already is transparency. The problem is that there are always going to be outliers, and there's always going to be examples which hit the media clickbait headlines,
Hmm.
and that then gets characterized as, well, this one church does it, therefore all churches do it. And that's, I think, the negative narrative.
Right.
I'd love to see us talk more positively about the role that we play in our communities, because I think that's the missing link. To
Mm.
drown out the negative stories, we need more positive ones.
Yeah, yeah. Now, some critics argue that wealthy charities operate more like businesses. At what point does a charity's financial success challenge its moral standing? You're interested about this?
Well, I think it's a really good point to make. And ultimately, the trustees or whoever's in charge needs to come back to the purpose for which they were set up. That needs to be the beating heart of the organization. If a group has gone so far away from their purpose that they're no longer at all aligned with it, then I think there needs to be some serious questions. But I would say the vast majority, particularly of your listeners, I would say the vast majority of churches are very focused on their purpose. There's actually been another change in the Charities Act, which means that every organization needs to review their rules every 3 years. So this would be an encouragement. When did you last look at your purposes and your rules? Because they might be decades out of date. So that's something we've been helping lots of churches look back and realize our document was written in 1942, it
Mm,
needs an upgrade. So that
sure.
would be my encouragement. These are living documents that should be kept up to date.
Mm. Now, let's finish things off here because I'm just thinking, for those listening, Christians listening today, how should Christians engage in the public consultation process? Is there a way even to do that? What is the best way for faith communities to respond?
I'd like to see faith communities submitting, so they have until the end of the month. We've written some papers about topics that people might want to think about. So people are welcome to have a look at those. And it could be a very short submission. Could just be simply, I'm not in favor.
Mm,
Or it could be, I'm in favor of this one or that one. There's 15 questions that they're seeking input on. So particularly for those churches that do have unrelated business income, give a scenario of how this would impact the day-to-day good that you do if you didn't have as much money available. And
mm,
try to weave in stories and storytelling into everything you do. Whether you submit or not, this should be part of our narrative so that society doesn't have a negative perception based on one or two outliers, but instead has a perception that there's thousands and thousands of churches which are helping and playing a positive role in our communities. So keep telling good stories about what you do.
mm. Steve, thank you so much. And you mentioned there that you've got some resources. How, if people are listening and thinking, actually, I kind of like that, how do people access that or can they?
Yeah, it's all free. It's on our website, so parryfield.com. There's a section there for charities and about resources. My name is very unusual, Stephen MOE. So if you Google, you'll probably be able to find my email. If you send me an email, I will send you the information. We just had a session for 650 people that signed
Wow.
up, going through all the detail. And so that's a recording as well. That was with Craig Fisher and Jenny Gill. So really happy to share our resources, and hopefully it helps people.
What an important conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show today, speaking with Steve Mo. And of course, if people want to find out more details, could you give us that website address again, Steve?
Yeah, so it's Parry Field, so PARRYFIELD.com, parryfield.com.
Wonderful. Thanks again for being a part of the show today.
Thank you. Ka kite ano.
Thanks for joining us on Rhema. Now, if you found value in today's content, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel with the subscribe button. This really helps us to continue to produce more quality content for you. And hey, if you'd like to stay updated and never miss any of our future videos, ring that notification bell as well. Don't forget to follow us on our other socials, which are in the description below. And until then, stay tuned.